Welcome, my lords, to the White City, where you will learn more about Middle-earth and discover differences and similarities between the Rings of Power show and Tolkien's books, and whether Amazon's show, episode by episode, is worth watching. I'm Philip Dutt, your host, and I'll be joined by Matt Vandervoort and Mark Schaefer. I hope you enjoy. So one theme that does come up in both the Rings of Power and in Tolkien's books is redemption and how characters going through that. I think one character that kind of shows that in both the show and the books in different ways is Galadriel, and the overcoming Sauron in the show and overcoming the ring in the books. For the, as the books wise, it could be kind of like debated whether or not that's actually a redemption scene as opposed to just overcoming like what she's supposed to overcome, essentially. But yeah, so it's interest to see how, at least in her character, she is, in a lot of ways, I guess, the redemption story is very similar. But I guess like what's the point behind it in a way? And are there other characters in like the show or other, places in the books that we can draw from to compare just how redemption plays out in the adaptation and in the original stuff? So
one thing that I was going to say especially about the show, is that I think there are comments that can be made already, but it is also very early on in the show's storyline. Like, characters like Galadriel, I don't think have had their if they're going to have like a redemption moment, have not had that yet. Like, I think that Theo is kind of on a path where it's like, I think he'll be really the big kind of commentary on redemption, because he's already waffled back and forth between like, am I a good guy? Am I a bad guy? This one king seems to be like kind of up our alley, but then also like, but my mom wants to go with these elves. So I think it's like, either he's going to be a Nazgul or he's going to have a big redemption arc. And so I think that in the show, I think it's a little bit too early to call the showrunner's position on it, just because it's season 1. But then you can talk about in the books, like, I think, Galadriel sort of has a redemption arc with her rejection of the ring when you add her story in throughout the Silmarillion and everything else. Gollum has a sort of anti-redemption arc where like he seems to be doing better and then he completely falls back into wanting the ring, and yet it's somehow that like fall back into disgrace that saves the world. Boromir has the redemption arc of, wanting the ring and then immediately sacrificing himself and thus earning the right to be played by Sean Bean. So I think that when you look in the books, overall, there's a sort of a theme of redemption. Like, even Aragorn, to some extent, is coming in and redeeming the line of the kings. But the way it plays out is very different, and Tolkien sort of covers the gamut of all different types of redemption arcs.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Whenever you were talking about redemption arcs, I instantly tried to like make a list of all the redemption arcs in like Lord of the Rings. And also I like thought about The Hobbit briefly, and like It was actually really hard. There's not
Mm,
many. There's like Gollum is like obviously he doesn't really come back in the end. I thought of like some others. I used to mention Boromir. I thought of Durin in The Hobbit. Or sorry,
yeah,
not Durin, Thorin, who
Thorin, yeah.
but like both Boromir and Thorin die to redeem themselves. And what's really interesting is there's a lot of people who like go bad, and whenever they go bad, they don't come back, right? Like Gollum in the end,
Yeah.
Saruman as well isn't ever really redeemed.
Mm,
Wormtongue as well, right? So there's a lot of these characters who when they go evil, they don't come back. And you guys mentioned Galadriel, and I think we've talked about this before, but I don't. I think that scene is not really about the evil within her, but about the power of the ring, like over anybody,
yeah.
including
Oh, yeah.
Galadriel, and not really about she has like experiencing redemption from her evil past or something. That doesn't really exist in the books. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that like maybe told the way Tolkien sees redemption as something as like different, or like I think maybe Boromir and Durin sorry, Thorin are like good case studies of like what it means to redeem oneself. But yeah, it means like for one thing, it means not escaping the consequences of your actions. I think of both Thorin and Boromir, who in some sense they die because of situations they put themselves in because of the evil choices they made. Because Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo, they're sort of caught out whenever the orcs attack. And Thorin, if he had, been more peaceable and been willing to share the gold of the dragon's treasure more, might have led the Battle of the Five Armies being different. But yeah, I think what's really interesting is like the show does do a like redemption, or at least seemingly the start of one for Galadriel. Um, but yeah, I think it's like really cool that they do that, and that's like a pretty cool thing. I still think the whole thing with Sauron not really knowing if he's evil or not is weird, but yeah.
One more redemption arc in the books that I think is probably like the most Catholic redemption arc. That really shows Tolkien's idea of redemption. Is the the Oathbreakers that Aragorn goes and gets, because they fulfill their oath, but it's not the action of fulfilling the oath that lets them rest. It's Aragorn absolving them of their oath. And I think that reflects Tolkien's idea of like, we cannot redeem ourselves. We can only be redeemed by someone who has the authority to redeem us. And so it's that sort of, that is a great picture, I think, of Tolkien's idea of redemption.
Yeah, I actually did think of them, and I think it's interesting that they as well, after they like have their redemption arc, are also like go pass on, right, or whatever. So like,
Yeah.
there's a sense,
It's
very interesting sense of like,
yeah,
yeah.
it's
But do you think?
I was real quick, I want to make the distinction there that with Thorin and Boromir, redemption is death. Like the fact that they die the fact that they die in the moment that they realize they've done something wrong and they sacrifice themselves to make it right is their redemption. Whereas with the Oathbreakers, the reward for redemption is sort of death. They're already sort of dead, but like the ability to pass on and rest. And I think that they're similar cases, but it's important to make that distinction. Where one of
Yeah.
them, the reward is death, and one of them, the payment is death, sort of.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I believe Bilbo forgives Thorin as he's dying in The Hobbit, as well as Aragorn forgives Boromir as he's dying. So there is this
Yes.
element of the like their redemption, like the act of redemption isn't actually what saves them; it's somebody else's forgiveness, right, or something like
Yes.
that. But yeah, I think I
Even
still
to
think
even to some extent, you can get that with Gollum, where even though he's not like alive to receive it, you kind of get the attitude from Frodo that in his death, he sort of pities and feels bad for Gollum in that same way, where it's just like, obviously he wasn't like trying to get Frodo's forgiveness, but he still sort of receives it to some extent.
Yeah, I think It's really interesting, and I think it is interesting that there's not maybe more redemption arcs in Lord of the Rings. I guess my quick question was like, do you guys think that that has anything to do with Tolkien being Catholic and their belief on? I believe there's two different kinds of sins in the Catholic, and some are ones that cannot be absolved, as I recall. Right? They're like mortal sins or something like that. Um, I wasn't
Honest,
sure if that was like maybe part of why he doesn't have more redemption arcs, or at least it's really interesting that Thorin and Boromir are really good characters who have like one or two missteps and then are like redeemed, right? But not like Gollum, who has been like had a long time, or even you think of Denethor or uh even Saruman, as well as like characters who have really fallen away for a long time, don't come back from it. Um,
Yeah, I think
I
interesting.
I think there's something to that. I just don't know enough about Catholic theology specifically to make a real answer to that question.
one thing that I thought was interesting, because if you think of, like, Catholics do have the idea of penance, right? So you go through, you work and do something, and then you're like, you know, then like you're almost like you're paying for your own sins, in a real way. Um, it actually just kind of almost makes sense in a way, because you don't really have, like, I as we were talking, like, the only characters, as far as like I'm remembering, that are redeemed by somebody else's actions, really seem to be like the men of the dead. Um, and like everybody else is like doing something that in
Mm,
the end gives them redemption.
yeah. Okay, I got
And
one actually. Sorry, finish it.
oh, okay, yeah. So, anyways, like, and that was something I was trying to think of between like the show and the books. Is there more of an idea of people in the show who are like doing something to get the redemption than like somebody who is like coming and redeeming people? I mean, there's not. I mean, you could like call like Gandalf coming with the Rohirrim to Helm's Deep. That's not necessarily redemption in a way, but as that's more of like he's just saving them. But yeah.
I was going to say that I think that the fact that like Middle Earth had the chance to destroy the ring and didn't, especially blaming Isildur, so
Mm.
like all of the men are sort of corrupt because of Isildur's mistake, and that somebody else is the one who destroys the ring and saves the world. So I think there is that actually, like, men in
Mm,
general are redeemed through the act of another, Frodo and stuff. Yeah, I think there maybe is something to that.
I
yeah.
think another example, if we were going to widen our scope a little bit, is and this is sort of a dark example of redemption, is Turin. At the end of his life, he kills himself. But even then, it's like he asks the sword for permission and like asks the sword to punish him basically. And it's not really redemption as much as it's penance in his own eyes. But again, it's not that he feels that just falling on his own sword is going to absolve him of the guilt. It's like he needs the sword to absolve him of the guilt. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think that's actually I would not say Turin is a
no,
redemption arc.
I'm not saying it's a redemption arc. I just think it's another example of like characters in Tolkien can't forgive themselves. They need someone else
Hmm.
to forgive them.
I don't think the
Um,
sword is forgiving him. I think it's doling out some justice, right? Because it
yeah,
claims
well,
it said it had to drink blood unjustly of other
sort of
people, and so it will drink
tying
his.
those things together. Like, obviously, like I said, I think it's a fairly dark example. I don't think it's a perfect 1-to-1, but it's just kind of another example of like Turin can't get justice for himself. He needs the sword to dole out the justice.
Yeah. I was gonna tie this back really quick to the Rings of Power. It's pretty
Yeah.
clear that like the Rings of Power does have this redemption arc going on with Galadriel, and it's not finished yet. I guess I would bring this back to a discussion we've had before as well, but that like in Tolkien's world, like good and evil are just so clearly drawn, and we can really see like, oh, this is exactly what Boromir did wrong and stuff. And I think it still feels like very much like in the Rings of Power, it's like very vague and like Galadriel, she has like this sort of dark side, but it's sort of justified because her brother is like, and it's just really not clear to me. And Sauron is also wrestling with his own good and evils, aka Halbrand. It just really is not clear to me that I don't see this like really clear distinction between good and evil of like this thing that she did was evil, this thing she did is good. I don't know, right? Like in Tolkien's work. So I'm glad they have like this redemption arc going on. I just wish they would make it more clear cut as Tolkien's works do.
It'll be interesting to see like where they take her character in a lot of ways, where she ends up at, I guess. Thanks for visiting the White City. Before you leave, please subscribe to our podcast and check us out at thewhitecitypodcast.com. Consider supporting my movement on Facebook, keeping the Rings of Power pure.